The topic of my short talk will be about responsible research and innovation. We will explore a little about this concept, notion, and approach. And departing from that comprehension, I will explain a little bit how we in the Human Brain Project have been working with the RRI approach. And please write down your questions, your commentaries, and we can have a chat after the presentation. So in the discussion moment, and we can debate about many things that I will be sharing with you. And I am very happy to gain your input, your feedback about these topics. And as you already know, the Human Brain Project and eBrains is a huge research and innovation project. And here we have already this notion of research and innovation, because the Human Brain Project is working with information and computing technologies, is developing a research infrastructure, and at the same time, the Human Brain Project is doing basic neuroscience and other type of basic research. So it entails, from the research ethical perspective, a lot of ethical questions that arise in their interdisciplinary work that relates to the brain. Those of you who are coming from the neuroscience, you know the complexity of the brain, and the Human Brain Project has been working in all levels and scales of the brain, from the molecular level until the behavioral level, and with simulation, with computing, developing computing software, technologies, doing simulation, and building this research infrastructure. So it's a huge research and innovation project. That's why there are more than 500 scientists involved in this project, which means from the ethical perspective that we are coming from these different disciplines. Myself, my background is in sociology and applied ethics, in bioethics and research ethics, with specialization in neuroethics. But we have colleagues who are coming from other type of social sciences and humanities, and of course neuroscientists, but also sociology, psychologists, anthropologists, and people who are coming from the medical field, etc. So each of us has their own ethical frameworks that has to do with our own knowledge and field of practice, our own deontologies, how we call it in ethics, and we have to manage to work together. And that's why we have been working with this responsible and innovation approach. And I will tell you a little bit about the story of this approach. And as already mentioned, the Human Brain Project is not only doing basic research in neuroscience, advancing brain research in a collective way, but also developing emergent technologies and brain-inspired technologies. And this entails, again, other type of ethical questions that has to do with research ethics, but also with the consequences of our research outcomes to the society. So how can we anticipate the consequences, the implications of our research results that will affect the way maybe that we are looking at ourselves, so our self identifications as human beings can be altered by the advance of neuroscience. For example, notions so basic and classical notions as free will, that we all are, as human subjects, we are free, and part of our human dignity has to do with our autonomy, our capacity to take decisions freely and to distinguish between good and bad, etc. What if neuroscience comes to the conclusion that it is the brain that is taking the decisions and not we? That has to do with consciousness, for example, with self-awareness, etc. That type of implications of brain research raises a lot of ethical and philosophical questions as well, but also the technologies that we are developing. We have, all of us, your generation, my generation, we have been part of the technological revolution of the smartphones, for example, and we know how this technology has impacted our way of living. So now we are interacting via cell phones. We are doing everything. It's not only before it was phones. Now it's everything here. It's our extended memory, for example. If I lose my cell phone, maybe I don't remember the numbers of other people's, etc. So I need this artifact in order to interact in this type of society. So it's an example how technologies shape the way we live together as well. So that means a lot of responsibility, and here raises the classical ethical questions. Everything that is technical possible is ethical, is responsible to do it, and there we have to be aware and discuss about the implications of our work, both when we are doing research with human subjects and animal models, the human rights of the people, the well-being of their non-human animals, for example, but also when we are developing technologies, the implications of that type of technology in the way that we are understanding ourselves, but also how it impacts in society as a whole. So there we have, as a short presentation, many ethical layers that arises in this type of interdisciplinary work in a huge research project like the Human Brain Project. If we concentrate in the technology side, yes, because research ethics, maybe it's more spontaneously, those of you who are coming from the health and care related sector, for example, you're very well trained in how to treat patients and users and clients with respect to their dignity, for example, how to communicate bad notice, for example, to someone, and in a way, in an empathic way, for example, etc. And when we are doing research with human subjects, we have their developed guidelines, etc. Even we have the GDPR, the General Data Protection regulation, that has to do with sensitive data, for example, how we store, how we analyze, how we share, etc., the data from people. But when we are thinking about technologies, maybe we could think that there are not so many ethical issues involved. Yes. And those who are working with normally from behavioral sciences, they have a training in this type of research ethics, but how about technicians and engineers, etc.? That's not so, even in neuroscience. If you check your curriculum, do you have there an ethical moment, a specific ethical moment? Maybe when you are preparing your research project for asking for informed consent, but as a core part of the work, that's not so usual. So that's why in the Human Brain Project has been very interesting to work with other colleagues who are coming from other fields, where these issues that has to do with ethics, not only with research ethics, but also with innovation, are taking place. So how we raise awareness around these issues, and that when we are working with ethics, it's something that has to do with excellent science, not something that takes us time we would like to concentrate, to focus in our research project, in our publications, for example, in our data. The ethics is part of each of the moment of their research project cycle, innovation cycles as well, and also of the dissemination or their implementation of those technologies. So, for example, some of the questions that raises with regards to technology: who benefits? The question of the whom benefits this? What are the risks? What if we are wrong? What are the alternatives? So working with different type of scenarios. Who is in control? It has to do with the decision-making processes, for example. Who is responsible of the technology? You surely have read and saw documentary films and maybe even discussed around different type of technology developments when scientists or technicians say it's not my responsibility how other uses this technology. So where starts the responsibility? Where does it end? What if the technology and the scientific knowledge that we are developing have more than one use, what we call the dual use issues? So for example, the Human Brain Project, because it's financed by the Horizon 2020 EU funded project, is for non-civilian uses. But some of the knowledge, maybe technologies can be used for military purposes as well. There we have dual use issues. But am I responsible as a technician or as a scientist for those type of potential uses? That's a discussion about being responsible, when it starts, when it ends, and which are the consequences. Yes, and here in this type of questions, you can see the different ways that different ethical schools that raise ethical questions during the history of ideas. So ethics that has to do with the virtues. So which type of professional I want to be, which type of what kind of society we want to build together. So being virtuous in that way, and other type of ethics has to do with the duties and the rights of people, and the consequences, the benefits, the risk, and those type of different ethics, and we have other type of ethics as well, are involved even when you're doing research for innovation purposes in the technological field. The control dilemma, it has to do with this, with technology. And this is for raising awareness around these ethical questions. That Collingridge raised this question that in early phases of the development of a technology, the technology is still, you as a developer, you have some type of control. But when it is implemented, maybe it's too late already to control that technology. There we have this like analogy with Dr. Frankenstein. Yes, and that we build something and with some purpose, and then we lose control. So how to manage this type of dilemma? And for that, there has been developed different type of approaches that intends to anticipate the consequences of new technology. And new technology always involves research and with humans or with non-human animals or with groups, etc., with the environment. So there can be consequences to whom, this question of the who. It raises always this ethical dilemma of how to manage to control, anticipate the consequences of your development. And here we have different approaches that has been developed. For example, the constructive technology assessment or value-sensitive design, responsible innovation by Owen, which is in the core of responsible research and innovation. The ethical, legal, and social implications, the so-called ELSI There in their Human Genome Project, for example, there was a committee at ELSI that studied the ethical, legal, and social implications of that research. And then we have their RRI approach. It's one of the approaches, is one of the answers to this control dilemma. How can we anticipate the consequences of our research? How can we, that our research and its products and the applications and the impacts on people, society, environment can be ethically sound? How can we do that in the early phases of the development, of the design of the technology? And that it's analogous when you think about a research project. In the early phases of the formulation of your research questions, there are already ethical implications. How you justify your research, when you will do research with human subjects, for example, or that affects the environment or the society as a whole. In early phases, we have to be responsible, not only when we, at the end of our research project of a technology development, we are in the phase of their implementation of something. Yes, when you publish something, you are already making impact on others, so you have to be responsible. Yes, and there we have the RI, a responsible research innovation approach, that has to do with the Horizon 2020 projects in Europe. And we are now in the HBP, we are facing a transition from the Human Brain project that was more in their first years, were more related to basic neuroscience and the development of different type of neurotechnologies and robotics inspired by the brain. And we are now in this transition from their Human Brain project to the end of the project that will conduct us to their eBrains research infrastructure that will continue after the project has ended. And in this transition phase, we are beginning to develop the notion of responsibility by design. But I will concentrate the next minutes to responsible research and innovation, and I will close explaining you how we have been working with this in the Human Brain project. So the responsible research and innovation approach as such, so the RRI approach, came out in their declaration of the European Union, the Rome Declaration. And the idea behind the RRI approach is that ethical values and societal needs are part of all research project and innovation project as an ongoing process. Yes, so that science has to be for society and with society, taking into considerations the ethical, social, legal aspects of your work from the beginning until the end, and also anticipating future scenarios. And so that the decision in research and innovation must consider the principles of the European Union, such as respect for human dignity and human rights. That's the basic, the fundamental approach. And maybe that's something that it's very logical, but it's not so much. So it's a political decision to conduct science within the approach of the human rights. We have in the world, the Human Brain Project is one of the major brain research initiatives, but it's not the only one. We have 5 big research projects now that are working simultaneously, trying to crack the code of the brain in different fields of research. The Brain Initiative, for example, in the US, that began with President Obama, and is financed by DARPA. And DARPA has to do with the military in the US, for example. And we have a big research project around the brain in China, for example, and in different parts of the world. And there are different approaches that has to do with the value. Also here comes into account the different cultures. So the decisions that the Human Brain Project is Horizon 20 founded means that we are working within the human rights approach. And that sets the table at once, because it has to do with the inherent dignity of the human persons, with the respect of their dignity. But also other type of values that has to do with freedom, democracy, equality, justice, the rule of law, and taking into consideration special measures for vulnerable groups, as children, impoverished people, in general, communities, populations that, because of their position in the social structure, can be easily, their rights can be vulnerable. Yeah. So and that's the principles and value approach from with the responsible research and innovation approach emerges. ROI approach means that research innovation takes a long-term perspective of the type of world in which we want to live, and there we have the resonance of virtue ethics, which type of society we want to live in. So it shapes the direction of your work. Yes. For example, if the technology, the value of a future society is autonomy of the people, then the development of technology has to respect that. And that's in the early phases of the design of the technology, and not as now, for example, with Google, with Facebook, etc. That discussion with artificial intelligence that we now are aware that they are not so taking into consideration our privacy of the data they gather, for example, with big data and machine learning, etc. The RRR approach means that we take this long-term perspective from the type of society we want to live in, and that shapes the way you develop then your research process and the development of the technology. ROI strengthen research and innovation projects, making them more open, transparent, diverse, inclusive. That means that, for example, even the agenda of the research process is discussed with different stakeholders. And ROI approach means in that respect that the researchers and scientists are not alone, isolated, working, separated from the rest of society. No, you have to take into account and meet and encounter, for example, patient organizations, a different type of stakeholders, so that you can gather their opinions and not only inform what we are doing, but what are their concerns, and those concerns are taken into account in your research process and also in your technology development. And in that way, you align your project to their needs and wills of the society. And that's something that it's debatable, and it's contested from the part of some scientists that has another type of approach to science. But this is RRI. Yes, it's science with and for society. And the with here is very, very important. And because that means what we will call public engagement, for example, not only dissemination or information or communication, but engagement of the public in your research process. RRI enables a broader way of defining researchers and their role in society. So we are part of society, and helping both science and society to consider these long-term actions and engaging actors in the project. So in a nutshell, RRI means public engagement, and here public means public. It doesn't mean that you're working only with your disciplinary critical friends, like we do when we publish a paper. Who reads our papers? Our scientific community. And then you quote that paper, and that has some circulation, but within the scientific field. Here is public engagement, so with the non-scientists, and that you encounter them and you engage them in your research, and you take into account their concerns, values, etc. Open access. At all our publications in the Human Brain Project are open for public. Gender equality it's a key issue in the RRI approach, because we know that what the feminist movement in different waves in the history has shown us, that that there are inequalities in different parts of our society, and we're talking about in that type of gender, because we can broaden this to a broader notion of diversity, where the things are even worse. But half of the human population has been non-equally treated, and that expressed itself in science as well. There are many studies that in power positions in science, they are mainly male. It's very complicated and challenging for our female colleagues to make it as for the others. So gender equality, and we have to broaden this with the Black Lives Matter movement to diversity issues, has to be part of the RI approach. Yes, from the project in itself, not only afterwards. So how we do research has to perform it in a gender equal way as well. Science education is for the population in general. And here, when we are talking about brains and technologies, there are many hypes and many concerns that has to do more with Netflix, Black Mirror movies, etc., than with reality. So, for example, when you are talking about robots, you can imagine that the robots are coming and taking our work and jobs, etc. Well, when you work with robots, the robots are they're not so evolved right now. They can do multitasking, etc. So we have to be responsible, and there are ethical implications, but we have to be realistic. And one way to discuss these issues, to address these issues with society, is to communicate the limitations of our work as well, what is potential, but also the limits of our work, so that we know, society as a whole, and the scientists, the technicians, etc., what we are talking about. Yes, and their scientific communication is ethically relevant for an informed discussion, an informed debate in society. You need to know and understand what are scientists doing and technicians doing. Yes, and in the time of fake news, it's very important. A transparent way of communicating both their ethical implications and potentials, but also the limitations of the work. And governance. It has to do how you organize your work. And in the case of the HBP, so we have this RRI approach with those key issues, yes, as public engagement, gender equality, etc. And the HBP took the decisions to take into account the area framework as well, which was developed in the UK and from the field of the so-called STS studies, the science and technology studies. And it helped their HBP to operationalize their RRI approach in a practical way. So the area framework established four entries to the research and technology development. For example, in this case, has to do with anticipations. I have mentioned it a lot. Reflection here is important, so that we not only anticipate the impact, the potential impact of our work, but also we reflect on what we are doing. And here's a place for humanities and philosophy and conceptual work, for example, yes, of reflection. Reflection is very important, of the purposes, motivations, the values, your own values as researchers, but also the institutional values of the founding agency, etc. Engagement, I mentioned it already, so that it has a more deliberative approach, so that we can discuss and take decisions together. And act, and here's the practical part: act. Yeah, so because we can reflect, we can anticipate, we can engage, when we need to act from the beginning. Each time we make this type of reflection, anticipation, we have to act. It has to shape those reflection, engagement, anticipations, the way you are working and the technology you are developing and the project with you are researching. So in the HBP, we made like a mix of the RI approach with the ERA framework, and we applied it to the process, different processes that we are developing in the research and the technology development part, in the product development, and the purpose of what we are doing, and the people that are part of the project, and here's the answer to the who impact is, yes, to the interaction with society in general. And here you have you can open some type of questions that you can apply to your own research project, for example. So anticipation that has to do with process, for example, opens the question of, is the planned research methodology acceptable? And when we are saying acceptable, then you have to discuss some values. Acceptable, okay, from a standard perspective, which one? Which values, which principles make something acceptable? And you have to discuss it. You have to be aware with yourself, with your values, with your research community, with the institution, with the research project. That's something that is the clarification of the concept of the values that are involved. And it's important that you have that clear for you, because it shapes the methodology that you are using. For example, there are participatory methodology, and participatory methodology takes time. Always to take into account others, it's take more time than when you do it by yourself. But a participatory methodology, the inclusion of others in your research project takes time, but it's ethically sound if your value is participation, is inclusiveness, is deliberation. So it shapes the way you are doing things. And participatory approaches, for example, makes it easier the acceptability of your technology in society, because you have been working with society already from the beginning, and it's not something that comes from the outside. You have to be taking into account the discussion, informed, etc. So there are different type of questions that you can open with the area framework from their RRI approach. Reflection, for example, reflection on purpose. Is the research controversial? Okay, if it is, discuss it. Why? Is it realistic, those controversies, or is more fantasies around there? They need more information to solve those controversies, or maybe it will be controversial always, like in dual use issues. Yes. How could you do it differentially? Engagement and people. Who prioritizes research? It has to do with the agenda setting. For whom is the research done? Yes, which is the population, your client, your user, your patient, etc. That's very, very important. For children, okay, that's vulnerable groups. That means special ethical measures to respect their evolving autonomy, for example. Patients, they are in a very, very special anthropological situation, and there needs some type of measures from the earth technology development. Yes, for example, raising an example, the so-called social robots in elderly care. Yes, so for example, now in the COVID time, that there is a need of so-called social distancing. What happens with the elderly if they are institutionalized and their health professional, care professional can come in contact with them? A robot can be a solution, the so-called social robot. So they can come in and take, it's an easy task. A machine comes and takes someone and move them from their bed to other part, for example. Okay, but what are the ethical implications of that interaction between the elderly person, the frail person, and this machine? What if the person is attributing to the machine some type of subjectivity, some type of characteristic that are typical for human beings? Empathy, for example. The machine is not empathic, it's doing a task only. maybe they want something that what we need in the human interaction. So there are always, when you're working with a technology that will be part of a concrete setting in the interaction with people, there raises ethical questions that you have to deal with. You have to address them and try to manage them in an ethical sound way. And there the whom is important, because it's different maybe for a frail person, the use of that technology, and then for another user. Yes, so there you will get the presentation. There are different type of questions that you can apply to your research project or your development project that helps you to address ethical issues. And to close the presentation is only a short description how we have now concretely organized our RRI work from this Responsible Research and Innovation area framework in the Human Brain Project. So the Human Brain Project in this phase now, the last 3 years, is organized in 6 cross-disciplinary work packages. And you have here work package 1, 2, and 3. There are that we call the science work packages. They are doing basic research in the different levels and time scales of the brain. We have 3 work packages that we call them the infrastructure packages that are developing different type of technologies to share data, to simulate the brain in models or brain-inspired robotics, for example. Supercomputing that needs to solve different type of equations, etc. That to integrate a huge amount of data, you need those supercomputers, and that we collaborate within different countries and centers, etc. And we have then 2 work package 7 and 8. 2 work packages that has to do with management and coordination and education, for example, and communication, and work package 9 that is responsible research and innovation. And there, so we have in the Human Brain Project, and that's very original if you compare it to other big brain initiatives in the world, we have a specialized work package that deals with RRI. And there, here you have a scheme about how we have developed this area framework that has to do with anticipation, reflection, engagement, and action in different tasks and subtasks that work doing basic research now in RRI. So researcher awareness, dual use issues, data governance issues, for example, ethical compliance, but also neuroethics, that philosophy of the brain, for example, that has to do with the philosophical implication of consciousness studies, etc. And communications, I mentioned already that it's ethically relevant. And we have, so you have here the different tasks of this work package, the responsible research and innovation. We have a so-called ethics rapporteur program. Each of the work packages choose 1 or 2 or 3 colleagues that are doing research or management, etc., in their different roles that are ethics rapporteur. So it's a ethics rapporteur network that we meet monthly or bi-monthly, and we raise ethical questions, we discuss it together, and when we put it in a document that we call the one-pager. And we inform this to the directorate of the HBP, and we act upon that mapping of ongoing ethical issues. And we inform it even to the society through our web pages and different newsletters, etc., and encounters, and to the European Commission, who is our founding agency. And we have also independent advisory board, like the ethics advisory board, who are working with the ethics rapporteur. So we have some people who are experts in different areas, ethics-related areas, from outside the project that are matched up with the ethics rapporteur. And in that way, we have a collaborative working with society in that respect. And an ombudsperson that has to do with, for example, fraud and other type of misconduct in science. For example, that we haven't had it, but we have to have an ombudsperson for other type of interactions, bad interactions within the consortium, sexual harassment, etc., or someone that has felt that is treated with in a discriminative way, etc. We have there that way an ombudsperson with confidentiality take that issue. So we are working with research ethics, with neuroethics specific to the brain, with ethics of technology and gender issues. So there you have their RRI, different RRI components. All of them conducts a certain type of ethics, and we have built a governance structure that ensure that the project is conducted in a responsible way. So that was from my part. I hope it can inspire some questions afterwards, and thank you for your attention.